think we'll go ahead and get started in a couple minutes. Well, thank you everyone for being here this afternoon. It's a very special occasion why we're gathered here. This is to celebrate David Sachs' tenure as our Regnier Faculty Chair. David was our second Regnier Faculty Chair, preceded by Professor Gary Coates, and then followed by Professor Dick Hoak, who's the current holder of the chair. The Regnier Distinguished Faculty Chair was established by Victor A. Regnier and Robert D. Regnier and Catherine M. Regnier to honor their father, Victor L. Regnier. Victor A. Regnier is a 1971 graduate of K-State holding degrees in architecture and architectural engineering. The purpose of the endowment was and is to recruit and retain the highest quality faculty in the Department of Architecture and to recognize and reward faculty members for past achievements, to support faculty members in their efforts to become recognized leaders in their area of expertise, and also to, of course, bring recognition to the institution. It's a very rigorous process to become a Regnier Faculty Chair. There's a blind review process in which the candidates are actually submitted to another high caliber institution, and they're there to make the award present. In 2011, David Sachs was awarded. David Sachs spent his time researching on the work of Kansas City architecture firm Aben Singleton, and we're actually very excited to have a distinguished guest here. Kurt Aben is here. David will do some more introduction. Professor Sachs has been with the Department of Architecture since 1988. He holds a doctorate of architecture from the University of Michigan and a master's from Rice University. He's taught architectural studies at all levels, and more recently been known to coordinating our second year. So we have quite a few second year students here. His research interest is architectural history. Professionally, he has worked for RTKL Architects in Shanghai, China, Gassinger Walker Hardin Architects out of Kansas City, and other firms in Missouri and Mississippi area. So with that, I'm very pleased to recognize David Sachs, our Victor L. Regnier Chair.
Well, thank you, and once again, I really want to thank Steve Abend for coming this afternoon and being in my studio reviews, as well as being here, and Chris Ross, who is sitting next to him, who worked with Steve for 18 years and knows the firm very well as well. So I'm going to try to watch my clock here and not talk more than about 45 minutes so that we'll have time for questions and conversation. My title is History and Historiography because I thought with students in the audience, part of my obligation as the Regnier Chair is to bring things back to students and to the studio, and so I want to talk about both what I did and what I discovered, and so you can learn a little bit about the writing of history, which may be a kind of mysterious thing at the moment for some of you, but so I'm going to talk about, again, my methodology as well as what I discovered. I'm going to start with, and it's interesting, some of the things that I know are, as is often the case, are bound up with my own experiences. And the first of the Aben Singleton buildings that I got familiar with was the Swinney Rec Center at UMKC, and I got to know this building because I swam here every morning for 7 years, and it was a wonderful place to be, very comfortable. I really enjoyed the light changing in the mornings as day broke, and then at other times during the day when I swam during the day and this wonderful sliding door opened. And so I came to appreciate the work of Aben Singleton in a very personal way when I first came to Kansas City. So I'm going to start and show you this building as a way to introduce you and hopefully get you interested in what's coming next. I like this building not only because of the swimming pool, but for what it did for campus. It was a renovation to an old gymnasium building with a large addition to it, but it honored the existing building. And then it also helped to make a center of campus where there was none. It started as a hodgepodge of older buildings and gradually grew into a university. And this building was one of the things that helped it become a real space. And it connected other parts of the university with paths that helped to define the movement patterns on campus. And so here you see the plan. The existing building is this little building with a big gymnasium added to one end and the swimming pool added to the other. And nestled down in the ground, as you've seen down the hillside, so it kept the scale at the campus side appropriate to the other buildings. And as it wrapped itself around the existing building, it made the most of the juncture between the old and the new, and the circulation was able to weave its way through in a comfortable way. And the circulation then was open into the gymnasium, so it was all a very pleasant place to be. And back to the beginning, the swimming pool and the little outdoor space by it. So with that, I'm going to stop and tell you a little bit about what I did. I had talked to Steve several times through the years as I got interested in the work that he was doing, and always admired it, and was in some ways mystified by it, and how it could be so diverse and always so good. And finally, when Steve had retired, he was ready to reflect a little bit and agreed to talk to me and agreed to share resources and enabled me to do this work. And so I read everything I could about the firm. He was kind enough to allow me into the archives. I read the archives. We talked about projects I should see, and I've seen, I don't know, 75 or 80% of the projects that they've done through 40 years. And then I started interviewing people, and I talked to people who had worked at the firm, as well as others who knew the firm in different ways. And so here's a list of the people that I interviewed in these couple years. I think it adds up to more than 50 interviews of a variety of people, many of them employees and people who knew the firm in other ways. And as I began talking to people and learning more, I was beginning to get clues about what was it that made this firm what it was. And as I thought about this, themes emerged, and as themes emerged, I would write papers and present them at various conferences. A history paper is a 10-page, double-spaced, 20-minute presentation. Is kind of the building block of historical inquiry, and then these are discussed at different meetings in different places with different focuses. And so over time, I talked about this Lessons for a Lifetime, which were Steve's and Kite's preparation for practice. And they happened to be in some really interesting places at the right times and carried a lot with them into the practice. Developing a design theory, it occurred to me that they believed in certain things, behaved in certain ways, and out of that there emerged a kind of consistent way of working that evolved over time. And we'll talk a little bit about that again. It also occurred to me that this firm had a number of very special people in it. Steve Aben and Kite Singleton, the principals, were both remarkable people, as were people like Chris Ross and others who came through that firm and stayed for varying amounts of time and were able to make a contribution. And so that's a remarkable story unto itself. And finally, one on the legacy, where I tried to ask myself, what did this firm leave behind? And so I'll cover these things in a brief way, but starting with the lessons for a lifetime, the preparation, and it's difficult to have the guy you're talking about in the audience here, but I think I'd say the same thing anyway, whatever. Steve grew up in Kansas City. He was the son of immigrant parents who had to work very hard to make their way in their adopted home. And Steve showed talent as an artist and had experience as an architect even in high school, and had shown a great deal of talent, and he was encouraged by his parents to make the most of the gifts that he had been given. And I think that this has helped to propel him through his life and even to today. When he got out of high school, he went to Washington University, which was at the time a bastion of mainline modernism under the direction of Joseph Passano. And Steve excelled in that context and won student prizes. And the more accolades he got, the more determined he was to do even better. In his thesis year, his 6th year, he had the good fortune of studying with Aldo van Eyck, a Dutch architect and member of the Team 10. Team 10 was a kind of rebel group from the CIAM that was critical of modernism and was looking for other ways to think about architecture other than the mainline modernist theory, and in particular was interested in vernacular architecture, among other things. Then after a stint in the Army, Steve came back to school. He went to University of Pennsylvania and studied in the master's class with Louis Kahn. And I think carried away from that things, again, that have stayed with him. And this afternoon, he was quoting Kahn to my students. So it's in him, whether he wants it to or not. At one point, he was talking, he stopped and he said, do I have any ideas of my own, or am I just a disciple of Kahn? And my answer was, yes, both are true. That Kahn is in him, but I think he's gone well beyond that and off in different directions. So anyway, then Kite Singleton also grew up in Kansas City. Kite and Steve hadn't met as youngsters. Kite was a couple years older, but he also traveled in different circles. He was son of a family of doctors who were well-known and influential in the city. And he learned that one of the chief lessons that he learned was one has to use one's resources to help other people. And again, I think this sort of civic view stayed with him and does to this day. He went to Princeton, and it was anticipated that he would follow in his family traditions and become a physician, but while he was there, he discovered architecture. And he happened to be at Princeton at a particularly fascinating moment. It was the time when Charles Moore, this was Charles Moore's master's project, but Charles Moore by this time was studying for a doctorate, and Robert Venturi was a master's student at this time. And so in retrospect, this can be seen as a kind of hotbed of, or precursor of postmodernism, where there was a real freedom to think about architecture in a whole variety of ways and broadening the definition of what it meant to be an architect. unwittingly, Kite ended up in the middle of this and had a fascinating introduction to architecture. He went on then, it was an undergraduate non-professional degree. He went on to Washington University, Kite did, to get his professional training, and there he met Steve and admired Steve's work. Again, he was a year or so behind, but he really admired Steve's work, and they became friends. Kite studied under Balkrishna Doshi as his master's mentor, and Doshi was an interesting character. He was an Indian architect who had worked for Le Corbusier in Paris and was gradually becoming more and more of an Indian patriot. India gained its independence in 1946, and Doshi began thinking about what it meant to be an Indian and to do architecture as an Indian, and what were the characteristics of Indian architecture for this new country. And so he also had an interesting introduction to architecture. Kite went on, after a stint in the Army, in his case, went on to work with Doshi in India. And while he was there, Doshi was overseeing the work of Louis Kahn, the Indian Institute of Management. And so Kite also got to know Kahn in a very different context, so they had this in common. Kite and Steve met again at the office of Kivett and Myers. And Kivett and Myers was one of the early proponents of modernism in Kansas City. It was also the place where the most talented and ambitious architects, young architects in the city, interned if they could. And this is a building that Steve worked on that he calls a deeply conflicted building. The owners wanted a traditional building, and Kivett in particular and others didn't want to do traditional work. And so here is a building that is trying to be different things to different people. And but anyway, it's part of the heritage of this, and the heritage of modernism and the struggles of modernism in Kansas City. So anyway, after interning there, Dean Graves, the man in the middle, was a colleague and got a big job and left Kivett and Myers, and he asked Kite to join him, and Kite in turn asked Steve to join them. And so the three of them started practicing together, and this was 1967, as urban architects. And this was the project that got them started. It's in some ways a pretty straightforward modernist building, but with some interesting touches. The ends are have the circulation and the mechanical systems in it, and really reflects Kahn's idea of separating served and service spaces. It also is interesting in that it respected the orientation, and so they were early proponents of sustainability. Also, this is the back of that building, and they always thought about how to make the most of the site and how to use the site in the most advantageous way. And so here they use the topography to be able to tuck the parking underneath the building and really protect the areas in the back, which was a residential area, from the front, which was a thoroughfare. In these odd little coincidences, Rebecca and I moved into a little bungalow right behind this building. When we moved into Kansas City, we didn't know what building this was, but there it was. One other building I'll show from this urban architect's experience was a little bank renovation building. And it's a modest building, but it was the project that got A. Ben Singleton published for the first time in national journals. And it also prefigured some of the work that you'll see later, in that how they restored the outside and did something very different on the inside. Dean Graves left the firm after about 5 years. That could be a story unto itself, but his view of practice and Kite and Steve's didn't quite mesh. Kite and Steve were more ambitious in terms of the quality of the work and the scale of the firm, and Dean chose to go a different way. And so this is their first brochure where Steve said this was a little firm trying to look like a big firm. So then developing the design theory. As I said, it really evolved over time as a way of working, and almost without thinking about it, much of this is apparent only in retrospect. It was second nature at the time, and but it produced this body of work, and it grew out of this way of working and a way of thinking about things, and it also became a wonderful training ground for young architects. Again, not that that was the point of it, but it turned out that way. So what were some of these values, and what did they mean? Well, an uncompromising drive for excellence. And that excellence was measured by peer review, not by the money they made or anything else. It was the validation by the profession was the most important thing. And every job was seen as a new opportunity to renew one's sense of value in the profession. A commitment to the iterative process, and so they were rigorous in looking at a whole variety of possibilities as a way of understanding the nature of the challenge and trying to find a particularly appropriate solution. They believed in collaboration, and the way the firm worked was typically, we'll talk about the people a little later, but typically they hired young people. The young person would work with one of the principals back and forth, and the discussions were much like the kinds of discussions that we have in the design studios. And so then the point of this is that this brought together the wisdom of experience and the enthusiasm of youth. And so it was fused somehow in this office. There was a strong commitment to the community. There was interest in trying to make buildings that really made the environs better, not just the building itself, but really tried to build the whole sense of community. They also tried when they could to do public work because they wanted to work for someone who shared their values for the public good. They had a strong dedication to details. This young designer typically would stay with the job as it went through the office, and it went through design development and went through the working drawings and even under construction, so that the design eye was on everything from beginning to end. In this pursuit of distinction, there were a number of ideas that found their way into the work. Steve had a way of coming in at the end and adding something to add interest or intrigue or uniqueness to it. And I like what he said. He said, this is like the dessert in the building, in the building design. But, and then they also concentrated their efforts in a way, places where it showed. And they tried to be original as best they could in every way, and tried to avoid copying precedent of others or even themselves. They looked to a variety of different things for inspiration. Steve this afternoon was talking about artists and the way artists work to my students. And Also, the use of narrative, some idea or story that drove the design was a common theme. The use of both logic and intuition and a sort of this holistic view. And search for clarity of order through geometry and through the use of structure. In the process of doing this, it emerged, and again, only really evident in retrospect, that there were some things that found their ways into their buildings on a regular basis. Exposed structure, contrasting geometries, and the use of skewed geometries, the contrast of rectilinear and curvilinear geometries, oftentimes the organization around a central space, sometimes in a radial way, use of reflective materials to make spaces appear bigger, elaboration of connections, and the use of experimental materials and details, or a deliberate kind of exploration of the possibilities of construction. The use of buildings inside buildings. Some things that I added to the list, this other are things that Steve talked to me about, but I could see dichotomies in this work. The more I looked, I saw more kind of dualities in the work, things that I call relaxed formality, things that were mostly symmetrical, but with some items that were clearly not, that set off this axiality, kind of aggressive modesty, if that makes sense, that they worked very hard to do something that just seemed right and didn't require notice. And deferential modernism, modernism with this sense of idealism, but not a single-minded idealism, one that looked to the things around it and deferred to other things. I'm going to show quickly a series of buildings with very little discussion that illustrate this. And I'm looking first at a series of buildings that are in Liberty, Missouri, the Clay County Courthouse, which they renovated, and it led into a number of other jobs, 2 other jobs, the addition to the jail and the sheriff's facility, and the addition of other courtrooms. These were grouped around an open space that opened into the courtyard square, so it really made a civic center in the middle of Liberty. And I suggest you all go look for yourselves. But anyway, this is the new courthouse addition, and again, as you see, some of the central space, the radial order. This is the back of the court space, and again, it's very different from the inside, which had a much more sense of formality. This is doesn't look like it's the same building, but this is this kind of dichotomy. These are some jail additions to the existing jail. Again, taking from this and doing something with it that adds scale and character and relevant detail. Every job they did, they dug in and really tried to understand the building type. And this jail building was entree to them for many, many other correctional facilities. And we saw a publication, an advertisement that used this building to advertise other things. But again, this image and this building got them into a whole new genre of buildings. A little building that's on the other side of Clay County is this county service center, which was to serve people on the other side of the county so that they would then support the additions to the projects in Liberty. This is interesting because for a couple of things. One is, this is one that began with the idea of narrative. This was originally a big open field of tall grass, and Steve mentioned to the young designer that he could see this as a kind of ship sailing across the sea of grass, and this got the young designer James Polson going and thinking about things, and they worked this out together. but it's also was an opportunity to explore precast concrete and what one could do with details in precast concrete. And so another building, and I'll try to go through these quickly, but you see here again, there is this idea of radial. It's a radial building. It's a building that defers, excuse me, go back here, that defers to the context. This tile work on here matches the cornice line of an adjacent school. And it's interesting in other ways as well for the relevant detail and how that's developed and the materiality and the tile. It's interesting also because of the way the public spaces, how the public spaces are placed. It has a lobby on the ground floor, as you see on the left. It puts the laundry facilities and other common facilities on the top, and where all the residents can get a view. All of the floors have this atrium so that they're grouped in two-story floors. They're also arranged so that there is virtually no corridor space, which is unusual for a residential building, the way this is organized. A little building that is, again, in a way bigger than it is. It's a tiny building. It's a addition of a bishop's office to a big church in Kansas City. And it has all kinds of fascinating and telling ornament cast into the concrete. And the building itself, the shape of the building is shaped like a bishop's hat, or what's called a mitre. Here is, again, a space around which they built, which happened to be an outdoor space that was kind of an extra space that was developed between the church buildings and this little building. A school building, again, that shows many of the characteristic features. It's A.Ben Singleton and Dunn schools, but this was the one that got a lot of notice and really brought them a whole range of school work. This is I'm showing you the plan. We're looking at the entrance. Half of this building is only the upper floor. The other half of the building is a two-floor building because as the ground slopes down, you can see the ground is sloping down here. And it has these two spaces around which these two parts of the building are built. This is all of the common facilities, and in the center is the administration space. The lower part are classrooms, so they have direct outside entrance to this one and direct outside entrance from the lower level as well. So it was a careful use of topography. So I'm going to show you a couple of the inside, well, first the outside spaces. On the upper floor, it's a one-story building. On the other side of the site, it's a two-story building. And this ornament is drawn, it's the Broken Arrow School, so it draws from Native American imagery and patterns in the development of ornament that is particularly appropriate to this school. So anyway, here's this is the administration space on the upper level, like a little village of buildings inside. And here's the open space on the other part, which is the library with pods of classrooms of the same grade around an open space that looks into this library. Another building that I think is telling in many ways is this Kansas History Center. This is the entry now from the parking lot into this is the Kansas Museum of History. This is the little Methodist mission building I think it's from the 1880s, 1870s. And this new building that A.Ben Singleton designed formed a bridge between these two buildings, created this space in between them. This is where the parking lot was originally. So in a way, it liberated these other buildings and enlivened them as well through the addition of this history center, which is part archives and part office building. The lower floor is largely archives, and the upper floor is offices. And so here you can see inside the front entrance of the History Center is this wonderful reading room. And then when one goes up the stairs, one gets to the offices of the Historical Society. And here's a good example of how structure can organize space and how geometry organizes a building. Another building which talks, I think, is a good example of this expressive or aggressive modesty. This was to be an addition to this Violet Hall in Truman State University, but given the campus arrangement, it didn't seem like there was a good place to put an addition. So what they did is they put the addition in the middle of the building instead of on the outside in a courtyard space, and it really gave this building a whole new life and made the circulation of the building make so much more sense. The charge was to build a couple of large classroom buildings, which are built in the center of this courtyard, but then you can see this roof covers this whole courtyard, and it creates circulation around the edges, so it redefines circulation in the building and creates entrances to a number of different departmental offices directly from this. And it also creates, as you'll see here, space on top of these large lecture halls. And again, the structure is important in here. This is interesting. They kept the structure away from the existing building, so they didn't have to bother the foundations, and then cantilevered the roof out over the existing building. And here you can see how the circulation weaves in and out of the new and the old parts of the building. This is A. Ben Singleton's last office. This was, again, after they moved out. But this is interesting as a kind of showcase of the firm and the firm's capabilities. As we've seen in other instances, they restored the outside and reworked the inside. So once you come inside, you're confronted with something quite different. They also then held the renovated part of the building away from the face of the existing building and showed the existing building and the concrete structure of this existing building and re-inhabited this building. They were also smart in that they put the money where it showed, and this is a good example of that. The front parts of the office, the parts that the clients would see, were highly detailed, and the parts that where the work got done were organized in these carefully controlled workspaces and common tables with a balcony put inside. Perhaps one of the most visible buildings that A. Ben Singleton did was this federal building in Kansas City. I think it is an example of how they helped really remake the civic spaces of Kansas City and anchored the end of this new mall with the courthouse. And so this side faces the city hall across this new plaza. The opposite side of that building looks down into the river valleys and gives the judges views, panoramic views down, sort of up and down the Missouri River and the whole valley. And this is, I think, a good example of this relaxed formality. So that it's symmetrical as a total, but in details, it does what it needs to do. Another building, the building that's on the poster, and this was a building that won A. Ben Singleton a national AIA award for the restoration of the Liberty Memorial and the creation of a new World War I memorial in the space underneath the old memorial, and a very difficult job of figuring out how to make a an entry to an important building down underneath the building. And so I think this entry sequence is pretty remarkable, as are elements of the building underneath and how light comes into that. And it's also a great museum, so I can recommend this to you as a place to go when you're in Kansas City. Now, you see there is this ASAI. Well, what this is the continuation of the A. Singleton firm after Kite left the firm. And I have to tell this story on myself. This happened about the same time that I moved to Manhattan. And I wasn't in Kansas City, and I wasn't as close to things, but I was following design awards. And I looked at next year, and there was this ASAI firm that was winning all the design awards. And I said, is this a Kansas City firm? Is this a new firm? Who are these people? This work looks familiar, but I don't know these people. And, but it stands for A. Singleton Associates Incorporated. And so it's just by the initials, because again, without Kite's name on it, the work in many ways continued in the same vein and without any noticeable lack of or change in the rigor or quality of the work. This is a very small building on a difficult site. It's right by the Lead Center on the University of Kansas campus. And so it's this little building. It's the archive for Bob Dole. But yet it takes on a real sense of importance. And so, but it looks symmetrical. It's not on the inside, and it's not, you can see you enter down one side and come in through here. You don't enter on the center, but still, it really kind of draws itself up and makes itself seem important. And so here's the inside of it, the entrance, which leads into this great hall, which again is defined by structure. So we see a number of these things. One other example of work of this period was a little building that provided shared amenities to two condominiums just south of the Country Club Plaza, with a new sort of entry and drop off and porte cochere, and on the other side it's a steep drop off. This is the side, the north side towards the plaza, again with this dramatic waterfall off of it. So even little buildings, everything was looked at so carefully. And again, you see back as far as we look, the reflective surfaces, the curvilinear versus the rectilinear things, the use of structure to order things, the careful detailing of materials. And then the last building that I'll show is listed as PGAV. You may know this. There's a sign out by the president's home, by the new business school, that's being done by this firm PGAV. No, that's not wrong. Peckham, Guyton, Albers, and Vietz. Steve merged his firm into PGAV. And it was, I have to say, a kind of unhappy, it sounds like an unhappy experience. PGAV was more of a service firm, and Steve was more interested in the work and doing good work, and they were interested in pleasing clients. Again, it's not that simple. But in the process of the several years that Steve and the people that he brought with him were working with PGAV, they did several very good and interesting buildings, like this bioscience venture incubator, which is out by our Olathe campus. And it's a building that it has laboratories where young prospective entrepreneurs can work and develop their ideas, and some shared facilities where they can learn things, classroom facilities. The whole building, though, is envisioned as a kind of laboratory unto itself. And again, with many of the recognizable features in a different way, very different way. So, the human dimension. And I'll try to go through this quickly. When I talked to Chris Ross, he suggested this book to me about a way of understanding what this firm was like, what it was like to be there, what it was like to be part of it, what it was like to work there. And he pointed me to this book, Organizing Genius. And it's a book about a number of great groups in the 20th century who did great things, like the people who developed the atomic bomb. Now, it's debatable whether that's a great thing or not. But anyway, but common to these things are that each one of these has a strong sense of mission. They have a clear idea about how they will go about doing this. They have a strong sense of dedication to what they're doing. They have what they call a delusional optimism about what's possible, a strong sense of camaraderie, us against them, this group against the world that fed them. They had good leadership, and we'll talk about this in a minute, and remarkable people. Also, interestingly, they all had a limited duration. When the mission was accomplished, the group broke up, and or people peeled off because being part of one of these groups was terribly demanding. One of these things, as I said, that great groups had, according to this book, is that it was made of leaders who were pragmatic dreamers. Again, there's this duality about this, but that they were respected because of their abilities, that they were passionate about the work they were doing. They were able to communicate the mission of the group to those inside the mission and outside to inspire them. They were discriminating in that they knew good from bad, that they were able to recognize talent, that they were able to bring in that talent, that they were able then to put those people to work in a way that they could do their best work. They hired individuals who were very independent, but that independent work could be aggregated into something bigger. That there was a vision, and someone in there was a visionary who kind of could lead the charge, and then there was someone who was an enabler who would protect the group and keep the group afloat and defend it from naysayers. And interestingly, the book says that these two kinds of people were often two different people. And in a sort of oversimplified way, one could say that Steve was the visionary and Kite was the enabler. And as they worked over time, originally they each had their own projects, did their own work, and kind of shared the office. Over time, as they began to do the things that they enjoyed and they were good at, Steve took over more of the project responsibility. Kite took over more of the management, marketing, personnel kinds of responsibility, and was a public face, and Steve was more the driver inside. Again, this is an oversimplification, but in terms of the human dimension, this is not a great picture. But I just wonder if this person looks familiar to you, and the person that might be familiar to you looks a lot like this guy. He's an Oz editor, the person that looks like this, I think. I'll let you see if you can. I'm not going to tell. But anyway, about the team, the things that make great team members were people that were extremely confident, often young, again, with this delusional confidence of youth. They were committed to, they bought into a way of working and believed in what the office could do. They were optimistic about what was possible. They were talented. They could work in a back and forth way, this collaborative way. They were knowledgeable, and we'll see some people came in with special expertise, but they were typically hardworking. And again, these kinds of environments are demanding, and people responded that stayed because it was work that made them happy. It was joyful work. It was good work. It was work they were proud of. It was work that they were able to contribute to. They were also tolerant of the other people in the office and different ways of working. And they were selfless. They put the office above their own needs in a whole variety of ways. There were also people in the firm who had a special place of one sort or another. And again, you recognize Steve and you recognize Kite. In this leadership group is Anil Panchal. He was kind of the, I don't know how to say it, design triage, I guess, is he could come in and, as Steve said, could make anything work, and did so through much of the life of this firm. Tom Milligan, who was hired in to really beef up the construction knowledge of the firm. The two men standing up, Bill Crockett and Mike Handelman, were picked out of the crowd as people with particular management and communication skills who, as the firm grew larger, could take more of the project responsibilities, managing projects. And finally, Byron Emus, who had particular interest in judicial facilities and a talent for marketing, and really was a rainmaker for the firm in many ways. So, kind of the summary here, I'm to the end. The legacy took the form of people, places, and lessons. Just a minute. Yeah. So, you know, here was a place where young people could come in, they could sort of learn a way of working, learn standards, learn about team building and how people can work together, and about the value of collaboration. And many of them, like David Greisel, have gone on to form their own firms. His firm is Convergence. And other people like Chris, who's a principal at HNTB, have formed these pools of excellence inside of bigger firms and are helping bigger firms in Kansas City do wonderful work. And so the spirit of A. Ben Singleton goes on in part through these people. It goes on in part through the places that they made and places that continue to serve the city. My example here is the headquarters of the United Missouri Bank, which recognizes the history of the city, and this was the site of the old Emory Bird Thayer building, and so it picks up on the colors and materiality of this earlier building. It builds to the street edge like a good urban building does, and also it gives something back to the city. In the center of this building is this wonderful little magical courtyard that, if you haven't seen it, you should find it. It's a magical little place, and a place that's loved and maintained by its owner, and is really a gift to the city. And then, in terms of the lessons, this was one of my happiest moments in this whole experience, to see Steve and Kite sitting together, enjoying one another's company. After years of having a difficult relationship, their split was called by people in the firm the divorce, because it really had that kind of impact, that they were like a couple who, you know, spent much of their life together and really cared about one another, and the split was difficult for them both. And again, if this work helped them see that the value of their shared legacy, I think this, for me, this is satisfying work. So in any case, the way that they worked together, the kind of synergy, the way that they together were able to sort of help other people grow up around them, the way that they were able to build this a way of working that brought out the best in everyone, I think is truly an important lesson. And this is my last slide here. And so I think with this talk, one of the things that I'm doing is I'm preparing myself to write a book proposal, because I think this is a story that is really worth telling and many people will want to hear. And my notion, Enlightened Modernism, I think may be the title of my proposal, in the sense that here was a firm that worked through the whole postmodern times, which wasn't always the best for architecture. They did so with grace, and they somehow, postmodernism, they didn't have to be postmodernists. They didn't have to rebel against anything, because they always had this holistic and comprehensive view of what architecture could be, and it was never closed-minded, never dogmatic, always responsive, but always rigorous. And so I think I'm going to stop here, and you can ask questions, and maybe Steve will help me answer some of these, or not, or if it's supper time, that's okay too. I appreciate you coming.
All the projects that were shown seem to be relatively of the region, fairly close. And I was wondering, is that true of the work pretty much in total? Or
And there was a run of theaters in Illinois. Okay. Yeah, yeah.
Around Chicago.
Yeah.
David did a wonderful job in getting people to treat him like they were his investment. Or he was their investment. Amazing how he got people to talk, and I learned quite a bit about what happened, what worked and didn't work through David's interviews with others. And today, it's humbling to see the photographs that were taken as the buildings really are today, not through a fancy professional photographer, and when they were new, and it's more or less the truth.
Well, I would say one thing about doing interviews for my historiography part. When I interview people, I tell them, I'll write up my notes, and I'll send you my notes. And if I've said something in my notes that you don't want to be public, let me know, and I'll write them in the way that you meant them, even if it wasn't the way you said them, or I'll take them out if you think it's something that doesn't need to be said. And so it allowed people to talk more freely, and I have honored those commitments. And so for me, I think this is, this was a lesson that I learned in a way, sort of how to get people to talk. And I think that's one of the skills of a historian, maybe.
David, in terms of your method of working, how did you pick the people that you interviewed, and then perhaps more importantly, how did you prepare for these interviews? Did you just say, well, I know you work for this great firm, tell me everything you know, or were there very specific questions where you explored certain themes, or how did you go about it?
Well, as I talk to people, I would always ask them, who else do you think I should talk to? Who else could tell me more about this? So I kind of followed the trail where Steve and Kite helped me out. I talked to Chris early in this, and he helped me get started. And then as I got started, I just followed the trail. And in terms of how the interviews went, I tried to say as little as possible. I tried to get people talking and stay out of their way and redirect them a little bit, but be patient about things. And one of my most memorable interviews was I asked Steve one question, and he talked for 9.5 hours. Yeah. Well, I'll follow up. Steve had given me a list of A-Ben Singleton buildings, and my question was, which ones of these things are important for me to look at and why? And of this list of buildings, Steve described building by building which ones he thought were important, and he had a system of stars, 1, 2, 3 stars about the significance. So, having a good informant is a real key. And I think the other thing that I would say about this is everybody that I ran into, maybe with one exception, I guess, really felt good about their experience with A-Ben Singleton, whether from whatever point of view that they knew them. That for them, for the people that went through there, they all realized this was a defining moment in their career. And didn't mean everything was perfect all the time, but as they looked back, they could feel really good about it and really glad that they were part of this. And people that were served by A-Ben Singleton, the same was true. So people had good things to say.
Every generalization is dangerous. So to say modernism is good, postmodern is bad, obviously it's architectural object building to the urban tissue and urban places. And these images and the text you connected with them or explained them with are just, I think, making it a truth which is important. So I'm very much waiting for your book, and thank you for the
And again, this is something that this paper has got me thinking about, and also the way of working, the kind of heroicism of modernism, the kind of individualism of architects in this heroic modern period. You know, here was a way, again, to get back to architecture as a collective endeavor. And so even the buildings themselves, but also the way of working, I think both of those things speak about how one doesn't have to decide.
Well, thank you, David.